All right. All right, we're recording. Welcome to One Man's Life Mission, and I've got a special guest on today's show, the godfather of day game, Paul Janka. Welcome back. He's back.
Thank you.
He's back.
It's nice to come back to an audience who appreciates me. Yeah, the
Oh,
old days.
oh, come on. I don't think many people have forgotten you. I think there's probably thousands of men out there that are secretly hoping that you come back. For you guys at home, if if leave a comment below and let me know if you would like to do a boot camp with Paul Janka. Let's like leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Can we convince him?
Should I come back? Should I cut my ties? I'm anchored down here. Should I release myself like the giant on Gulliver's Island? Snap, 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 snap. Come back.
Yeah, I keep hinting that you should come back. But yeah, shit happens, right?
Yeah, that's right. Family life, the
Mm,
gravity, the old ball and
mm.
chain.
So we're gonna
So
talk
this is my
about
life
that.
story, huh?
Yeah, your life story. Talk about your life story and up to the midlife cliff, the midlife
Middle-aged Cliff.
middle-aged cliff. So
Mm.
maybe let's start right back at high school. Where did you pick up your first girl? Was it day game? All the way through to marriage. Oh no, we got in between. We got Dr. Phil, and when you really became, the middle part. So I'm just gonna tell you that, like, so you can maybe just fill it in so that we can do it more rapidly. But where did Paul Janka lose his virginity? How did he meet her? And
Oh, it was actually pickup. That's true. Um, Well, look, in the interest of time, I'll touch on a couple things. We're not gonna. I'm 45, so
mm,
there's a lot of years in there to cover. But let me say first of all, thanks for having me on the show. And we had to abort last week because we got Dave and I got talking on an unrelated topic so enthusiastically that we couldn't even get to pickup. So we have a
yeah,
natural rapport here,
my
and we
other
have some
one,
common
my other topic, China.
his other passion. But
Don't say
we
the C word.
I won't see it. Uh, but we got way off topic. It was very interesting, but so we rescheduled this for today. Yeah, no, I grew up in LA, and I was I mean, I used to tell my origin story more, but essentially, it's interesting. I did my first pickup did lead to my sort of first girlfriend and the loss of virginity. That was in Boston, and the girl was Mormon, actually, believe it or not. And we still, not so much recently, but we stayed in touch over the years, and I saw her many years later, and she'd become a nurse and she still looked good. Um and I think basically growing up at university, like any sort of heterosexual guy going through after puberty and stuff, I wanted to learn how to master my behavior with the opposite sex to sort of get the outcome I desired and get more attention. And but there weren't a lot of roadmaps, so I sort of fumbled along as most guys do. I never got, unlike today. First of all, I didn't grow up with the internet, but young guys today can avail themselves of all the stuff. You can read about pickup and the game and everything online. So if you
Mm,
wanted to, I guess you could kind of self-teach yourself some of this stuff. But my generation, we didn't have that, and I didn't know of any of this literature. So it wasn't until I moved to New York in my late 20s and I was single that there were like so many young people, and it was a really active single scene. And that's where it exploded for me. And I started dating a lot, and I got some attention from a lot of friends, and they joked that I should write a book, which I then did. I wrote a little pamphlet that got attention. And then one thing led to another. I was on, as you said, Dr. Phil and some other big shows. And simultaneously, actually, slightly before that, I partnered up with a guy named Dan, and we built a very successful online internet marketing business, basically information products, teaching guys how to date, teaching guys how to get women in the sack, pick up all this stuff. And since I've been living that life for a decade or so, or maybe not quite a decade, but it's many years in New York, New York's probably the best, not now, of course, but back then was probably the best and I traveled a lot trying to find a similar city that was as good as New York, but really New York was the best place I ever found for sort of casual dating. Places that where there were other really attractive women and an abundance. I'd never been to Colombia, so people talk about that, but
Mm.
Serbia was quite good. Belgrade, Paris was also good. There's a lot of fashionable young women in Paris. Morocco, interestingly, Marrakesh, I found pretty good in some, or in terms of the beauty of the women. And I spent some years after that trying to find a duplicate for New York, but I couldn't really. New York City was like a great testing ground. So that's where I sort of um, developed, along with a couple other guys, developed all my strategies, and we codified those and put them in a book. And then that business and that publicity led to a run for a little while until I met my now wife. And I was now, when we're talking about this was like 2008, 9. So how old was I? Well, I could do the math. 25, give me a second, and 8. I was in my early to mid 30s, 33, 34, 35. And I still was young, and I could have kept running. I don't know how old you are, Dave, but I know there's guys in the, do you volunteer that online or no?
I've been 28 for 12 years.
So I was in my early 30s, and it was still a really productive period for me. I mean, I had no problem dating young women or older women or whatever. I mean, early 30s are a great time for a guy if you're single, in terms of you can, and if you're single and you're in an environment where there's a lot of available women, it's a nice place. It's a nice time to date because you're not so old. Like at 31 or 33, I didn't have much gray hair. I was fit, so I could date young, like 20-year-olds, but I could date also older women, like milfy types, like 40. So,
Mm.
but at the same time, and I've talked about this, the biggest thing that happened for me at that period was that something shifted inside of me, mostly because my community started to change. Prior to that, I had like running mates, and then at about 33, I'd say early 30s, a lot of those men started to fall away, like my good pals, guys that used to be single, and we'd like run around together and trade stories and like locker room talk and all that stuff. That kind of started to really fall away because these men had girlfriends, or let's say maybe they got a girlfriend and they decided to buy a house, but they couldn't afford to live in Manhattan, so they would move to New Jersey or Long Island. So for the first time, like the wedge of practical considerations started to enter. I know it enters people's lives earlier if they're in a different trajectory, but for me, that's what happened. And that was a really tough loss. All those guys, it didn't all fall away overnight, but like some very good friends would be like, yeah, my girl and I are moving to New Jersey. We managed to save to buy a house somewhere cheap. And then that person's out of your life for all practical purposes, because
Mm.
before we could like impromptu run game, or like decide to like, let's go to a movie, or let's go out to dinner and maybe hit on some chicks or whatever. But this guy was then gone, and that started to happen pretty rapidly. Like men started to, by the way, this coincides with a period when people starting to get married. Like I remember there were a couple marriages in college, then a couple at like 25 years old that I went to, and a couple at 30. They seem to come like in pockets every 5 years. And after about 30, between 30 and 35, it was a watershed period. Like by 35, most people were kind of settled down. This is even in a place like, well, I shouldn't say in New York. There's a lot of single people that are old in New York, but it was a time when a lot of guys started to, or they get girls pregnant or whatever. And so like the fun period started to come to a close. And what that meant for me is either I'd have to run solo, which is kind of lonely. I mean, if you're just dating girls casually and moving on to the next one, there's no continuity. It's also a lot of work, but it's like it was exciting in that period for me, but it was a revolving door, and it was a tough way to live when I didn't have any constant men in my life to like go out to dinner with or whatever. And then or so you can either do that, or you can get involved with somebody and sort of start to build, like form a nest and build a family. And like whether you have kids or not, but like when men get involved or they get married, same with women, they go into these pods and they kind of disappear for a while.
Yeah. Mm.
And I was like, shit. And I had met my wife, she was obviously my girlfriend then, and she was a really good candidate for a number of reasons, like mostly because we got on really well and I was attracted to her, but also she had great character and she was the right age for me too, because she was quite young. So we could have a lot of fun without worrying about children. Like I do see older guys who meet older women. It sometimes, and I don't mean old women, but like women, like if you meet a 30-year-old and you're 40-year-old guy, if they want kids, the woman's going to start to feel like, okay, these
Mm,
next 5 years, I've got to make smart moves. You can't be so carefree, and basically, because she has a biological clock.
mm,
But my wife, Emma, didn't. So we had 10 years where we didn't have to think about that. Um, and she was still, I mean, when my daughter was born, she was still young. So giving us enough. Ultimately, what one thing I've realized is that life trajectory, it's fundamentally, it's driven by like biology and practical matters, like biology and economics. Can you afford to maintain a family and live at a certain standard with enough bandwidth so that people cannot work, like the wife doesn't necessarily have to work, or maybe the husband doesn't have to work? And can biology cooperate? Does a woman, if you want kids, or do you have enough energy, even if you have kids, you have enough energy and you're young enough to like manage them and stuff? So
mm.
actually, I didn't realize this, but in middle age, economics and like biology start to become like the main determinants of stuff in terms of what you can and cannot do. And anyhow, so I met and it seemed like the right time for me to get off the merry-go-round. Seriously, I mean, I left New York. We started dating and long distance. Then we got very serious and moved in together. And I left New York. I moved to London in 2011. So I was 36. Yeah, just 36. So and then we dated 4 years and lived together, obviously. And then we got married when I was 40. And then my daughter was born at 42. And we're kind of maybe thinking about a second kid now. Although having kids is it's the most amazing thing, as you always hear, but it's also unbelievably difficult. And a lot of stress on the couple too. Even this morning, I was just thinking, like, unless you have a lot of live-in help, so you need a lot of money, and even then it's a
Mm.
little weird. I mean, even if I had the kind of money where we could have, I just think it's weird to have strangers in your house, like looking after your family. I've wanted to do that myself. I didn't, like, I want to take my daughter to school or have my wife. I don't want a hired person to take my daughter to school when she's so. And because of that, either I'm looking after her or my wife. It's like a zero-sum game. We both can't be like checked out and checking our phones or sleep. Someone's got to look after the child. So it puts a lot of stress on the family. So those are my considerations now. And um, like I said, we're thinking about a second kid. I'm 45. We'll be 46 soon. And yeah, I mean, hopefully I'll have enough energy to raise a second kid. I mean, the first couple of years are tough, but that should put me at about 50. And now my considerations are different. They're like, I'm working a lot. We're saving money. We're buying real estate. We own some. We're going to buy some more. We're trying to save up to buy a nice family home in London, which is, as you can imagine, super expensive. It's like
Mm.
£1 million and stuff. So these are the things that drive me today. And yeah, I miss the old days once in a while. I mean, of course, the young girls and all that stuff. But I was telling my wife, even more than that, just the freedom and the spontaneity, and not, there's the trade-off here is that if you want certain things in your life of value, whether it's building a business or raising a child or having a marriage, I mean, all these things, you have to sacrifice other stuff. And it's like responsibility. And I mean,
Mm.
this is sort of very obvious, but I think our generation and no one wants to face this. It's hard to, like, for sure, that's what the middle-age cliff's about. And the thing is, if a man doesn't position himself well for this stuff, I think his midlife, even in the best, I mean, we have a very good situation, I think, relative to a lot of people, and still it's hard. I think if you don't plan well and aren't lucky and don't have, the mental resources or whatever, middle age for a man and potentially, I guess, a woman too, can be a really awful period. It can be
Mm.
dry, it could be lonely, it could be stressful, and maybe if it's not lonely, if you go through divorce, it's painful. I have friends going through.
Mm.
So it's like basically this whole period, I'd say from 40 to 50 or is probably the most challenging. And my father died a couple of years ago. My mother's very ill with cancer. So it's like parents start to die. And it's fucking hard decade. On the other hand, if like my pride and joy, my daughter is like, so it's so wonderful. And we do have, it's nice to have a working family dynamic. Like we pay our bills, we have a car, we have a nice house, we travel. So in a sense, I feel very adult. Like we do have some of the pleasures of adult life. When you're a kid, you don't, when you're very young, you're kind of scrounging. So that offsets it a bit, but middle age is hard, man. And
Mm.
I don't feel middle age mentally necessarily. I mean, my body's tired, but I am middle age. I'm 45. So if I live till 90 or 100, if I'm that lucky, I'm halfway through my life, more or less, So yeah, I know it's maybe not the interview you want. We could talk about it, but I do think men should be, if I'm talking to any of your listeners who are in their 30s, that's why I had that podcast, Diapers Off. It's like, if guys are in their 30s, they should have a plan for their 40s, I think, and 50s. I mean, I don't think you can, like in your 20s, you can wing it, but I don't think the 40s are it's not a great decade to wing.
Mm.
I don't think so. I mean, your plan doesn't have to be my plan. You don't have to have children or family, but maybe you're building a business or writing a book, or it's important to have some structure that you've thought about that hopefully will make you happy, because I think one of the biggest things is everyone goes their own way in their 40s. Like there's not in your 20s, you have fraternity of men, for example. If, like, say you go to university, you have your mates or whatever. But by this time, I mean, I still have a lot of friends, and COVID, of course, changes everything. But for the most part, everyone's doing their own thing. A lot of men are just trying to stay above water with, pay the mortgage and raise their kids. That's why Hangover, that movie, was so popular. It's the dream of like guys in their like mid 30s coming back for one last, which is fun. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, guys obviously love it. It's great. The brotherly love, the laughs, and all that kind of stuff. But what it actually highlights is a more stark reality, which is a bit sad, is that the reason people want to do that is because for the most part, people are living on their own personal islands. You don't have it's different than in the 20s. And I don't know, maybe social media, I'm not of that generation, but young people seem to be in constant contact via phones and like internet, but I don't know if it's the same thing.
Yeah, not really. No, you hit the nail on the head. Because in your early 20s, you see, that's when you should see. I had a guy that was 20 years old contact me, and I was like, "What are you doing for work? What are you studying?" I'm like, "No, you're going to university. Come come speak to me after that, because there's a mixture of things that need to be achieved in your 20s, right? You need to have some sort of education. You need to make sure you've got some money." But if you go too hardcore, so it's okay, I'm going to go full education, full career, and you don't have that awareness of women, that's when you build up a big bank account and then you get divorce raped, you see, because you don't know. You need to have all these skills. And that takes a lot of time, right? That takes a lot of time, and you need to have like at least a little bit of each, right?
That's a good point. We need your voice in the community, because people don't talk about that. I've been an advocate for balance a long time, but even outside of pickup, you see a lot of young guys, and maybe women too, I don't know, but they want to do like all of one thing. They want to be Elon Musk. So all they want to do is build $1 billion business, or all they want to do is chase women, or all they want to do is make money. Or if you do anything too much and you're lopsided, you're going to suffer the consequences later in life, because that part of your life will be undeveloped.
Yeah.
So, whether it ends up hurting you in your love life or in divorce, or if you neglect education, then you're struggling to, perhaps get a job, or like, so yeah, that's a lot. It's a very hard thing. You've got to constantly try to improve on all your dimensions.
You need to at least have a threshold of education and money in the bank, or some sort of career going. But you also need to have that awareness of women. I guess if you go full on the female spectrum, you were kind of lucky where you had the female spectrum, and you were able to make money while doing that as well. And then you're able to pick a girl, that's not going to get you in trouble. And so many guys get in trouble these days, right? So it's like Jeff Bezos just lost billions of dollars. because if you look at old Bezos back in the 80s, I think it was, when he was working on Amazon, this guy was just the next level nerd, right? He just married the wrong girl, right? He had no idea what he was doing, and she just walked into billions of dollars, right? He should have taken a boot camp with you back then. I'm serious. So he wouldn't be in the mess that he is.
All right, just for Jeff out there, if he wants a boot camp now, for $1 billion, I'll walk him through everything he needs to know so he doesn't lose another 10. But that's a good investment, isn't it?
Well, yeah, if he understood what he, and had enough experience too, he's an intelligent guy. So all he needed to do was have a relatively average sample size of women to learn, okay, trouble, good, trouble, we'll go for the good one. He obviously married the wrong one, didn't really understand that. But so you need to have a balance, right? And that also depends on where you start out in life too. I remember reading an economist who was talking about how in America these days things have changed. It's not necessarily how hard you are of a worker or intelligence level. The number one determining factor of success is the one thing that you can't choose, and that's your parents in America today. I think he wrote that book came out in 2019.
Oh, really? I mean, I understand that the social mobility is way down in the States. What was the name of the book?
I forgot the name of the economist. He's a I like to read a little bit from the left side and the right side. I like to get a good understanding of what's happening in America, because in Australia, we're at the whims of what happens socially over there. So I have a look at both sides. You know, this guy hates Trump, but then I'll have a look at the other side as well and get a bit of an understanding, and then just piece together what they agree on and just go, okay, well, that must be the facts, right?
Let me ask you this, because I still coach, and I have a new product, Playboy to Papa, about the whole process of identifying a candidate for marriage so you don't get burned, and then sort of courting her, and I have something called 5 steps to the altar, the things you have to do before if you do want to have a family or get married, or even just any long-term relationship, things you need to do. And then my product also covers the early years of marriage and a bit on fatherhood from my perspective. But what I'm interested in, because you're more active maybe in the community in terms of talking to guys, what are young guys? I mean, I know men are always horny, that's a given, but like what's the preoccupation now of most young guys in terms of what they're hoping to do, or what they're afraid of, or what they want? I know masculinity has been under like all kinds of inversions lately, and there's politically correctness, and I mean, it must be man or woman, but since I'm a man, let's look at the male trajectory. It must be a crazy period to try to become a man and like know what your goals are. I mean, are people worried like, how am I going to make a living? Or are they thinking like, I don't know how to date in this thing? Or I mean, what's the major sort of worry or preoccupation?
Well, I think this generation that's just coming through, say 18 to 25, let's just say, they don't have the same opportunities as their parents did. They can't just pick a factory job, work 5 days a week, and then buy some properties and just have a stable life. We have also, you know, with the divorce rate, it's at about 50 or more percent. That's not really a big issue for them. They're not really thinking about that. It's more like economics and freedom, and where are they going to be when they hit middle age? And on top of that, there's a lot of there's a whole nother niche, since you've been in there, of these red pill guys that and there's like a lot of negative niche sub niches of the manosphere that they focus on all the negatives, but they don't really give solutions. They're like, women bad, this is bad, but there's no real solutions. And men are in this situation where with Tinder and social media, you know, Pareto's law, the 80-20 principle, it's got to the point where there's 20% of men that are jacked and good-looking men that now through social media and online dating, they have access to 80% of the women, and they're the ones that end up sleeping with them. And all they have to do is really spend a lot of time in the gym. And so for a man, it's like, okay, the economy's suffering already. And I got to get a career, I got to get an education. But then you've got these guys that spend 8 hours a day in the gym taking steroids and getting jacked. They're stealing all the women. These guys are going to have a lot of troubles when they hit their middle ages as well. These jacked guys, they're churning and burning a lot of women. But we don't know how well their careers are going at the moment, because how can you have a six pack and be able to bench 100 or 200 kilos uh, if you can do that? That's where all your time goes, right? And a lot of these guys, they do that, then they end up getting a lot of one night stands and sleeping with a lot of women. So it's where your time goes. There's so many things to do.
Yeah, that's an important thing. Yeah. That I've often thought of, just to pick up on that point. And I know there's some smart guys in the sort of the self-help or time management space that, I don't know if it's Tim Ferriss or Anthony Robbins, but for me, I really clued into that idea that you're talking about a long time ago. Like when you look at someone's outward life, the manifestation of their life, or sorry, their outward appearance of what they value, it's really a manifestation of where they put their time, right? So, and everyone, that's the one resource we all have the same, or not the same, but we all have a limited amount of it. So yeah, you could spend your time building a business like Bezos did, which is a smart choice in many ways. You could spend your time developing your relationship skills, which might help you have a stable marriage, or you could spend it on your body, like you say, in a certain way to attract women, or you could spend it on your education. So how you spend, where you focus your time, and the investment you make there will really, that's a huge, well, it's a marker of class, first of all, but it's a huge thing in terms of, what's the word I'm looking for? It distinguishes men. So in other words, where you spend your time, that'll play out how your life looks, either in the short term or the intermediate term or the long term. So it's really, and as everyone knows, like if you want certain outcomes, you should align yourself with people who are investing in the thing you care about, like if it's education. Or so, without judging, is that bad or good that someone, yeah, if they spend 8 hours in the gym and they have a ripped body, that's where they're focused, at the detriment of a lot of other things, perhaps education or money or career plan or whatever.
Yeah,
You have to,
if they're able to do like a guy that gets into pickup, do a lot of pickup and then do some coaching because they've acquired a good skill.
That's a good way to leverage that skill. That's what I did. Yeah, I made money off of it. You're right.
And the jacked guys that spend a lot of time in the gym, they know what they're talking about. They know how to build every aspect of their body, and then they focus on it. Then they start doing training, and they sell, I don't know, they sell steroids or like the supplements and things like that, and run the social
Here's
media.
the interesting thing, Dave, that when as someone, as a student of geopolitical paradigms and stuff and paradoxes, you'll appreciate this. I think the major problem, however, is only, as you just said, the Pareto principle, 80-20, only the people who are outstanding in a class really get attention anymore. In other words, you have to be super ripped, or you're like extraordinarily beautiful girl on Instagram, or you're Bezos or Elon Musk, right? You built or you have a PhD. All of these things basically demand a lifetime of dedication. So only the outliers really get noticed. So what that does is it skews society. It makes people choose a dimension and try to like invest everything in that dimension to be one of those 20%. But we just said 10 minutes ago that balance is the most important thing, where you want to try to be a decent in a lot of dimensions. Because if you're unbalanced, that's probably a book to write or something, but if you're unbalanced, then you're vulnerable in your other areas. And so as a human being, it makes the most sense to sort of man up on these different dimensions, but not excessively. And on the other hand, society only recognizes the extreme outliers. It's not good that you're fit. You have to be like ripped as hell and chiseled. It's not good that you have a comfortable living. You need to be a billionaire. So you have all these like these things that, especially for young people who are much more easily influenced or manipulated, they get these ideas in their head, and then it causes, I mean, but even in normal people, I mean, whether it's investment banking, our society in general, the winner take all society, it rewards outliers, which demands of them absolute commitment to the detriment of other areas of their life. So,
yeah,
for
like
example,
a great example is authors. We were talking about books before. My understanding is it's like the 0.01% of book or authors that actually make a living out of it. You know, most people, they're lucky to sell any books. But yeah, that's almost across the board.
I mean, I made the threshold. I used to make my living with my book sales. Yeah, no, it's extremely rare. That, and the example I think of is I have friends in finance who earn millions. They're they've focused on their career. Good for them, but they couldn't cook a meal to save their life. I mean, they can boil water maybe, but like, and I'm not saying everyone has to be a great cook, but it's like this skewed, this generation, or it's not just, it's all generations at the moment that don't have reasonable competence on a number of fronts. They can be quite imbalanced. And I think social media and technology actually exacerbates the problem, because why learn to cook if you can deliver roux and stuff like this? So you're able to sort of outsource. That's another title for a book. Maybe I have a book in me I got to get going on, but like outsource your deficiency. So whatever you suck at, you can just have someone else do it and pay a fee and just focus on the one thing. It sort of makes sense economically, because then everyone's doing their best skill. But on the other hand, you have a bunch of human beings that are massively unidimensional and are like pretty much hopeless if you take them out of their chosen sort of environment, right? They can't, which is kind of crazy. I always was more well-rounded. I always thought it's better to be solid across all fronts in case circumstances change than it is to be exceptional in one area, because that could, so obviously I'm biased a bit, but that's one thing. And I think it ties into our conversation, because I think once you hit middle age, the pockets where your Achilles heels really show. I think they don't show in your 20s for guys as much, or women. I mean, this also applies to women. I don't want to be, it's not just it's sort of gender neutral here, this conversation really. But I think in your teens and 20s, you don't really show necessarily, unless it's really bad, you can sort of paper over your deficiencies. I think in your 30s, people become aware of them, but you can deflect, you can change the narrative. It's about optics in your 30. I think people can look like they have their shit together if they don't, but I think in your 40s, it's hard to keep the illusion going. And I see a lot of, that's why I call it the middle-age cliff. I think men fucking they fall on their face, because you can't blag your way through a marriage or fatherhood. You can't blag your way through a proper career. I mean, you get fired, right? You can't blag your way through health issues. Like if you're smoking and drinking or grossly overweight like that, it'll show up. I mean, you can't laugh about it anymore. So I think middle age, it's a reckoning, really. Like 40s to 50s, this idea that like whatever you've been neglecting, and you think like, don't look over here on this side of my personality, that shit comes home to roost in the 40s. So it's all the more, I mean, I think partly I've had my share of difficulties, but I think my resilience and my ability, my family's in a pretty good situation now. I think a lot of that comes down to, I've always sort of nourished a lot of different sides of my personality. So I've never tried to go all in on one. I mean, even athletically, I was an athlete in high school. I mean, with COVID now, I'm a little bit out of shape, but like, it's important to constantly assess, I'd say, the 5 dimensions of your life, or whatever I did a podcast with Dr. Paul about this. It's important to look at these 5 areas or whatever, and constantly say, okay, I'm quite suffering here. I need to like get this shit together. You can't really make your way through middle age with too many holes in that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and sometimes you can focus on one aspect and you can still fail at it, you see. So there's guys out there that will focus on their career and it can fail miserably. But some get lucky. I've noticed that some guys in the manosphere, they focused on they got lucky, they picked coding or something to do with web development, and then boom, they started making a lot of money. But if you have a look at who they were back then, they were overweight, they had no social skills, but they got rich, right? Then they bought a lot of properties, and then at that point they had all this free time because they had enough money, and then they used that money and they bought the free time to spend it in the gym. And they're like, okay, now I'm alpha, but people miss the fact that they did get lucky by picking the right career at the right time. They had some parents supporting them when they were 18 and they left, and they happened to be making a lot of money.
There's a couple of other messages in there though that are sort of subtext that you didn't like. One is that's a success story where someone has the presence of mind to realize, okay, now I've made money, now I need to focus on my health because I'm out of weight, I'm out of shape or something. So that's a good outcome where you kind of reevaluate your priorities at a certain point, and that maybe they were grossly overweight or unhealthy. But you also have a lot of situations where money just amplifies character defects, where someone is already like a dickhead or like unhealthy and they just become more so by like, going on coke binges and I mean there's an old saying, I think it's probably pretty true, that money doesn't change much, it just amplifies who you are, your tendencies. So if you have a good moral compass and you have a self-preservation instinct and you mostly want to move towards the light, I think money can help you, but you can also move towards the darkness with cash too. I mean, you can, so it's interesting. I mean,
I guess what you're trying to solve is when you focus on something, you need to be efficient and you need to be successful in the shortest amount of time and make the most of it. And then you can move on to the other thing. But sometimes people spend too much time on education and career and it just never kicks off. Next thing you know, they're 40 and then it's like, okay, I got to grab the nearest girl. and then all of that hard work goes out the window. Which sometimes,
let me ask you this. Let me ask you this question as an observer down under. I mean, you keep your tabs on a lot of different things. You have your finger on the pulse. What do you think middle age? I mean, if any of what I've said resonates, I mean, from where you sit, not personally necessarily, but like amongst your friends or guys in your age group, or like, do you think middle age and these responsibility, because there's certain markers, right? I mean, society says by middle age you should have a house, you should have a wife, kids. These are less so than they used to be 30 years ago, but there's certain milestones that people, you evaluate your life. If I'm still at a bar getting shit faced at 50 and like haven't finished my undergraduate degree, most people would say like, get your shit together, So in other words, like there are certain societal milestones. From where you sit, I mean, I've been talking a lot about, I mean, what do you think about this idea of the middle age hurdle or cliff? Or maybe hurdle is a better word. This idea that like, it's not so, this is a decade that you can't blag. It's a hard decade. And also I was saying earlier, like parents start to die. It's a heavy decade too, because what I was saying, my wife, it wasn't so much I want to be young to chase girls, but I want to be young again to be carefree and have no, like now my time is all accounted for. I can't just run down to the beach and body surf and like spend the whole day doing what I want, kicking a ball in a field. I mean, everything is like, there's a lot of people counting on me to like deliver this and that. And that's just, I guess, responsibility and getting older, but I do miss that carefree life. So what do you think about middle age? What do you think about the demands that, or can someone avoid them, or it's all self-projection, like whatever works for anyone can work. Like you don't have to hold yourself to any standards. I mean, what do you think?
Well, when you reach that middle age, right, you start having a little bit less energy. You start having you don't have you're on like a decline, and
the sad truth. I didn't want to say that.
So what happens is it depends on what you've done up until then. If you've just wasted your 20s partying, then really you can blame yourself. But there's a lot of men out there in first world countries we're just talking about first world countries too, by the way. We're only talking about a small percentage of the entire globe. we're we're the privileged people in the first world countries. Imagine being in some like third world shithole somewhere in middle age. uh
Yeah, Jesus.
that's a conversation that we don't even want to have. But um there's a lot of men in first world countries that they don't waste their 20s and they don't waste their 30s, but they still fail. And they feel like they've done everything right. They've turned up to work, they haven't broken any laws, they've tried to get the right girl, and they hit their 40s and everything's a mess still. And they look back and they're like,
Hold on, let me stop you for that. Let me challenge you on that. I mean, yes, I'm sure there are examples, but if you take a responsible young man who works hard and gets a master's or a PhD or a law degree and then works in his 20s, saves his money, he might fail at his relationship and he might be out of shape or something, but at least he's probably got a fairly good work record, and he's probably employable and has money in the bank. Like, yes, there's failing at different levels, but I don't think that someone who's been focused and dedicated for 20 years, it's a total wash. This guy probably is in a position where he's got fairly good income. And wouldn't you agree or not?
well, yeah. But what are the statistics on guys getting a master's degree? How many people across first world countries?
Oh, so you're not talking about, you're talking about someone who maybe just entered the workforce straight away, and so their work life has been hand to
Yeah,
mouth pretty much. It's been
or
blue collar or what?
yeah, or even they got a degree, but they had to just go straight into the workforce. Things went wrong. Something happened with their parents early on. Maybe a lot of people
No, it
didn't.
definitely happens. Yeah. Mhm.
And some people just don't. They might have come from a first like a higher socioeconomic status, and their parents supported them to go to university, but they just didn't have the cognitive ability, or it was just something was going wrong with them. For instance, one example that I like to talk about, which is a sad story. It's a good friend of mine. As soon as we left high school, he went out and started building. He did a trade, and he makes good money. Actually, he makes good money, but he's on construction sites, and he works generally 6 days a week. You know, half a Saturday generally. And he's this guy's like an angel. Like he's literally an angel. I love this guy. He's never done anything wrong. Like I'm sure if I called him up, which I haven't had to, but if I was like, dude, I need some help, he would just drop everything. He's literally an angel, right? You know the saying, if you need something done, call someone that's already busy. Don't
Yeah,
call
yeah,
them
yeah.
lazy bum because they don't do anything. He's done everything right, and married a girl, recently got divorced. He's my age, he's 40, and he's still working 6 days a week. And he lost half of it because he's got two kids. She got custody of the kids, which is the usual thing. But he had to put an extra mortgage on his house, and then the economy struggled, and then the property prices collapsed, and now who had the guy that's done nothing wrong his whole life, all he's done really is come back from a construction type job and have a few drinks. That's really the worst case scenario about him. Like he would have a few drinks like every night, so he's got a bit of a drinking problem. But he's never done anything wrong his entire life, and now he's $1 million in debt, paying a mortgage off for a house, and he doesn't have the kids, and he's now me. I had like I've been up and down and all over the place, but I never got into some serious financial strife. And now you could argue I'm $1 million ahead of him. So that's just, life can hit people and things can happen.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And then there's illness also that can happen.
Yeah, so there's all these other.
Did he ever talk to you? I mean, maybe you don't want to talk about it, he's a friend who might watch this, but did he ever talk to you why the divorce, I mean, why the marriage went down?
I remember meeting her in the early stages. I know why. She was a bit of a nightmare. He turned up to what to he injured himself and ended up in hospital, and she was a nurse, and she was like, oh, this guy's a good one, and she gamed him because he didn't have any game, right? Um So girls are just naturally good at identifying men that they want to lock in. And she pretty much controlled that relationship from day one. So I guess if we go back, then if he worked on his relationship skills, but also he is living in an area that's pretty, it's not a high density area. It's not like he's in the CBD with lots of options. So it's not like he had enough experience to identify troublesome women, you know. And so um, and obviously his parents, they would tell him, look, you need to buy more houses. And I remember speaking to him, and he's like, my dad doesn't understand that my generation, it's harder to buy more property because the property prices are so high, it's hard to get into the market. My His dad was telling him that he should own 5 properties by now, and he's working 6 days a week. And so there's all these pressures from all over the place. And now he's in a situation where he's alone, $1 million in debt, still working 6 days a week, and starting to think, how many more years until I can retire? That doesn't. It's not. He can't see the future. He can't see an end to this now. And I use him as an example of someone who pretty much did everything right. Um, um, and and yeah, I went for a coffee with him, and he's like, "Yeah, I know." He just shrugs his shoulder. You don't hear him complaining. One of those guys just doesn't complain, just gets on with it. Um, but then there's other guys that mess around in their 20s and they get lucky too. So there's guys that mess around, and then something happens. They
Yeah,
land in a lot of money.
Planning is important, but it'll only get you so far. And also, when do you start planning? I mean, I dicked around a long time because I tried a lot of stuff, and a lot of things were not a good fit for me. I didn't enjoy them, or weren't wasn't interested in it. I mean, in fact, I was in a very lucrative financial career that I was bored with, and so I left that, which is the right choice for me, but made my life harder in some regards, but easier in others. I mean, you guys always pay the devil your pound of flesh, no matter what you're doing. So there's no easy road. That's a shame. On the other hand, he's got 2 kids he probably loves to bits, and his wife probably annoyed him. So that Dr. Paul used to say that divorced men or separated or single men who have children end up being some of the happiest, because they've done the offspring thing, their legacy. I mean, they've procreated, but they don't have to deal with the constraints of marriage. I mean, because it is the idea that one other person is tied that closely to all your decision making, it's a bit nuts. So
Yeah.
And they have that, but they have the kids, and now they have the freedom, and hopefully at a certain point the financial problems of divorce and alimony, that kind of subsides. And if they can get to a place where they are comfortable and they can date whom they want and they have their kids, Dr. Paul used to say that they often are, and he saw a lot, he counseled a lot of men. He said that those guys are often fairly happy because they get sort of the benefits without having, because obviously marriage is not a cakewalk.
Yeah, well, he says that. He says he's quite happy with that. But yeah, I guess it's making the right decisions. We're not going to solve these problems in a little chat here, but it is complicated, and men also get like bad advice about financial things as well. You should chuck your money into this and put it in here. And if they don't understand how all of that works, they're not good with numbers, and their buddies reckon that it's a good idea to put all their money in Bitcoin, and then they find out it's a bubble. They're like, whoops, back to the drawing board. So there's lots of pitfalls out there as well. I think superannuation's in trouble at the moment.
What is that? What is that? I mean, I know annuate, but what superannuation? What do you mean by that?
I don't know. I'm just a bit worried about superannuation and where it's being invested at the moment with all the money printing, and some countries are investing their superannuation funds for their countries abroad. I know Australia put over $1 trillion, maybe 1.5 trillion of Australia's superannuation funds into infrastructure projects in the United States. There's a lot of that going on. And then if we don't know what's happening, you just don't know. Things can go wrong, and there's people who retired and then they lose a lot of their superannuation when that was their number one thing they were focused on. And then you've got like what is it? Jeff Rickards, the guy that talks about diversification, and then you realize that diversification isn't diversifying by 10 times, because his type of diversification was having $1 billion and diversifying amongst 1,000 things and having a computer algorithm that ran it for you. And so you get a bit of misinformation there.
Interesting. Let me ask you this quickly, because we've been on for a little while, and we'll think about wrapping up, because an hour is probably good for your viewers. For you, from where you sit, and you understandably are cautious about stuff, you cite your friend's unfortunate experience. I mean, it is and also with COVID and the economies, I mean, there's some bright spots, but also in general, for the average male or female for that matter, they're expecting lower standard of living than their parents times. Well, it's a crazy society, kind of like what I was saying before. You have billionaires and multimillionaires who start businesses, but then you have a lot of people who are on subsistence wages, just trying to like make, living hand to mouth. So inequality is rising. For you, I guess what I wanted to ask you is, what do you think is the best look for a man in the middle age? Like, if you could write your story, either for yourself or just men in general, I mean, what is a good middle age, meaning like from 40 to like 65? After 65, let's say you're kind of in retirement. It's a different stage. Your body's creaky. I mean, that's different. But let's say like from 40 to 65, those 20 or 25 years when you're still fairly fit and look okay. And like, what's the right lifestyle model there? Like, what is it? Is it a satisfying marriage and some kids and good income and stable investments and like traveling the world and making a difference? Or is it being a bachelor and chasing girls? Or is it, I mean, like, someone who's sort of gotten really lucky and nailed it, what does their life look like for you? Or that's too general of a question.
No, I can answer it. I would say look at your parents, look at your grandparents and your great grandparents. How long did they live? What illnesses did they have? Go through your genetic makeup and figure out, okay, so grandma had a heart attack at 50. Great grandma and great grandpa had a heart attack at 50. Okay, well, you're probably not going to last to 90. Like have a close look at how long or what illnesses they do have, or great grandpa had a mental breakdown and had some mental problem, like went nuts around that time. And then you go through your family tree and it's very common. So you probably start to say, okay, around this period is when we start to drop off. And you get a bit of a vague understanding. But if grandma and grandpa lived to 100, and their parents lived to 100, and their parents lived to 100, then you can start to think, okay, as soon as around that time, I've got to be very, very careful. I need to be married. I need kids by say 40. I need to have a career by 40. Because I've got another 50 years, and I can't rely on, if you have a look at history, 100 years, how many things change in 100 years? It wasn't even 100 years when the United States wasn't even the superpower. I don't think they've been a superpower for 100 years yet. It was like pretty much officially after like World War II. So if you think about it, if you're due to live for 100 years, things are going to change. That currency that you're holding, you can't trust the governments, the taxes, what store of wealth do you have? All these things change. So you really need to be in a position where you can pivot around that middle age area, right? And so depending on how long you're going to live and what illnesses are going to, hit you down the track. But
what if you only have 10 years to live?
Then you do what I'm doing. You see? So like for instance, me, I've had two hip replacements. It's probably like 10, 15 years or whatever till I'll need to have another hip replacement again. And then it's like, okay, well, you might end up in a wheelchair. So when you start to think about it that way, um, you have to innovate. You need to think, okay, well, what can I do in the meantime? So my options were, well, I used game because I was a bit of a degenerate. I found a girl that spent all of her time getting a PhD and was a virgin. So she had the career, she had everything. So I was pretty much the hypergamous female that gamed. She was the male and I was the female, and I gamed her. Um,
Is that
uh,
the one in Oxford?
yeah, and so I had the option there, and then obviously a few more things went wrong, things out of my control. But I think longevity and making an estimation on how long you're going to live. If everyone in your family lives to 90, you should be focusing on having an education, a little bit of money in the bank at least, locked in a logical girl that's not emotional and going to lose her mind, and she's going to be logical and look after you when things are tough as well. And around that 40-year mark, you need to pop out some kids as well, because they're also your superannuation fund. Because if you treat them well, they'll look after you in old age. That's how the third world countries behave. Like if you go to every third world country, that's why a lot of them are overpopulated. They can't trust the currency, they can't trust the government, they got no real store of wealth. So what do? They pop out kids and they look after those kids. They really look after those kids well. And it's when you get older, you look after me. That's the story. So you train your kids to look after you in your old age. And that's why a lot of third world countries, there's parents that really dote after their children, because that's their superannuation fund. It's the only real superannuation.
Yeah, I mean, and then grandma and grandpa live at home and are taken care of for 30 years as they decline. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something very nice and comforting about that, and sort of more fundamental than some of our governments where we outsource that caretaking to nursing homes or pensions or other things.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting conversation for another time, but it takes pressure off of, I mean, the problem in those countries, because is that it's very consuming to do all that family care. So people don't have time to develop their own careers and this and that, nor is there opportunity. But you wouldn't have a thriving sort of middle class of educated folks like in that you do in Europe if everyone is totally consumed constantly with looking after generations before or after. So there's pros and cons to both.
My understanding is, even though they're poorer, because they look after their children so well and they have several generations under one roof, my understanding is, I could be wrong, but my understanding is that they're the happiest.
Yeah, that's what I've read too. Yeah.
Yeah, but we have too many pitfalls in first world countries, so we can do our best to play that game, but kids in first world countries, they have more options too. They're not reliant on you as much as in a third world country. So a lot of kids go off the rails because they have a lot of freedom too early. They're out there partying, so it's hard to play that game in a first world country as well.
Wow, interesting topic for another podcast. Dave, I think we should wrap it up, just because you and I could talk length.
I don't know how long. I don't even know how long we've been talking. But anyway, you guys at home, leave a comment below if you want to see Paul Janka doing a boot camp. I don't know, I don't know the chances of that happening, but
get me out of retirement. I told Bezos can get me out for $1 billion. Also, I'm going to include a link to my product, Playboy to Papa. It'll help any of your guys who want to start to make some steps towards commitment and family life, help chart the course. All right.
Cool. But it would be nice to put you in a 6-month training regime. We get you in the pool, we get you in the gym, we dye your hair, we just get you in a nice suit. we got the Rocky music in the background, we get you running up and down stairs.
Get me back into my former self.
Yeah, we just get you back out there, and then we got a whole bunch of guys like filming infields. We just start all over again.
That's exciting.
Like think
All
about
right.
it. A 6
Maybe
month.
it's maybe summer 2020 after COVID, 2022. All
And
right, let's start the campaign now. We got to bring Paul back.
I think it would be pretty epic, to be honest. You know, the you know, you probably wouldn't be allowed to do that, but it would be pretty cool, you know, just streaming. But you guys at home, leave a comment, let me
Tell
know.
us what you want. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, I would like to see it. I'd like to see
Cool.
it.
All
Well,
right, sir. This
thanks
is
for coming
me.
on. Thanks
Yeah,
for coming
welcome.
on.
Let's sign off.
I'll stop it right now.